Hello students and welcome to this video. This is Business Management Toolkit number 11, Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions. And in this BM Toolkit, there's only one video, and we're going to be covering all about this person, Mr. Hofstede. So this is Herz Hofstede, who was born in 1928, died in 2020. And he was a Dutch psychologist. He's very famous in the business management world. Now, he was an IBM employee many years ago. He was also a professor at Maastricht University, holds 9 honorary doctorates from around universities around the world. And the reason we're studying him is because when he was at IBM, this was during the 60s and 70s. He conducted research to identify how culture may be different around the world. So IBM back then was, as it is now, is a multinational company, and he, looked at how the business operates differently in different countries based on culture. And he conducted 117,000 surveys across more than 50 countries. And he basically identified 6 dimensions to culture. By the word dimension, we can say ways that we can measure how cultures are different. And we're going to go through all 6 of them. So they should make a bit more sense then. And therefore, there's 6 of them. So we get Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So these are 6 things which show differences between different cultures. Now, one thing just to mention before we go through these in a bit more detail. He came up with these, many years ago, 50 years ago. So some of the words we're going to use, some of the dimensions, I think are a bit outdated. But in general, there is some truth in them. But also it does build into stereotypes. So I'm going to be summarizing these cultural dimensions by using some stereotypes necessarily. This is kind of what he found in his research. So I'm just going to summarize that. So this is not necessarily how I think, but I'm just going to be summarizing his findings. So the first dimension was individualism versus collectivism. And this measures whether people in the culture, in general, do they prioritize the individual? And so therefore we get individualism, or do they prioritize the team? So who is more important? Is it me or is it the team? And we can also look at it. It measures the degree to which individuals are integrated into groups within society. So another way of looking at it is, in the society, do people tend to stick by themselves and form loose connections with people, or do people tend to form into groups overall? Now, in general, and again, warning, this is a stereotype. This is what the results of the survey found. So I'm just going to summarize these here. In general, the results found that European countries are more individualistic. So you can see over here, there's more of a me culture. People are more independent, more self-reliant, and focus on personal achievements. And Asian countries tended to be more collectivistic. So more we, more of a sense of community, more likely to be selfless and focus on group achievements. And this diagram here kind of summarizes it. You can see it behind my head, but again, you've got China fairly low, more down here, and then the US way up here as more of an individualist society. For all of these, you can check the actual results. If you go to the website, you can see what the numbers are for every single country around the world. So you can check out your own culture or whatever culture you most identify with, etc. So that's the first one. Second one is, again, this is where terms are a little bit outdated. So I've summarized this as masculinity versus femininity is the measure. It measures the extent to which the culture follows the stereotypical gender roles. And again, I'm just summarizing what his data findings were. So in general, he summarized masculine traits as people in the culture being competitive, having lots of ambition, being more assertive, and feminine traits were summarized as being consulting others, being more caring, being more cooperative. And so the way we could do this is we could say that managers with more masculine traits may be seen as aggressive in a country with more feminine traits. So you can see that if a manager was very competitive, very ambitious, if they were to work in a country with the more feminine traits, then they may be seen as quite aggressive, if you like. Now, it doesn't mean that males and females need to demonstrate these characteristics. Obviously, females can demonstrate male characteristics, masculine traits as summarized here, etc. And again, if you go and check the data, you can see that this graph here highlights around the world what the differences in the cultures are. Okay, on the third one is power distance. So this measures the extent to which hierarchy and rank is accepted in, there's a typo, in the society. So if we have a high power distance, this is kind of like it's very hierarchical. Juniors accept that seniors have more power. We have centralized decision making, which means that the important decisions are made at the center or of the organization or by people in the power, and higher rank is acknowledged. So this might be where the seniors, the CEO or senior managers have their own office, which is big and lavish. They have their own parking spaces. Maybe they're in some cultures, they call their managers by a different term. They might use a more polite version of language. Low power distance is when people think respect is earned. Juniors can challenge seniors and there's far more delegation. So you can see that in a low power distance, we don't see rank as much, we don't see hierarchy as much. And again, in general, you can see by the diagram here, in general, you can see that Asian countries and some of the African countries measured here tend to be higher power distance. So they have more of a sense of hierarchy. And in general, Europe, North America tend to have lower power distance as shown by the data. Number 4, short-termism versus long-termism. So this is how far in advance people in that culture tend to think. So how likely are they to sacrifice the short term for the long-term gains? So short-term thinking might be, we want results now, we need to profit now. We don't think so much about the long term. We're more focused on getting, profits now or whatever. Long term it's the results over a longer period of time that are more important. So we're prepared to make sacrifices now if there's a gain in the long term. And in general, as shown by the data, Asian countries tend to be more long-termism. Again, not all Asian countries, but in general. And we can see that the UK and the US tend to be more short-term. One thing that does influence this is political systems. So in certain democracies, then they have elections every 4 or 5 years, which kind of does build into more of a short-term way of thinking. But obviously, we're in a business context, so it's not necessarily that case. And this will then influence decision-making within an organization, whether they're going to focus on the short term or the long term. Number 5 is uncertainty avoidance. And this is what is our attitude towards uncertainty? So on the one hand, you could have these. You could have a society that likes highly structured routines, being told what to do, being highly supervised, having a timetable. Sounds a bit like a school. But some societies, when you go out into the working world, they're kind of a continuation of the schooling system to some extent where, they still have these things. On the other hand, you could have flexibility over how to do things, less supervision, can use own initiative, etc. And you can see that the first one tends to avoid uncertainty because, you're being told what to do. With the second one, it's more uncertain because what do you do every day? Well, you have more control over that. And so you're not being told what to do. So, and as a result, you have to think about which one do you like more. In some ways, the first one, being told what to do, having a very structured routine, it's actually quite safe in a way because you don't have to think. People just tell you what to do and you just do it like a robot. The second one requires you to be a lot more independent because you need to take control over what you do, set your own timelines, etc., etc. And so the second one has a lot more uncertainty because when you come to work, you can do things however you want to do it. And the final one is indulgence versus self-restraint. This was added in 2010. And so the indulgent characteristics tend to be things like we satisfy our needs and wants when we have them. We enjoy life. We have fun. Very generalized way of looking at it. But self-restraint is more. We look at self-sacrifice. We have duty is more important than pleasure. And we could say that employees in indulgent countries are likely to put up with less. And so employees in these countries they're more going to be aware of how they're treated by the organization, whereas people from these cultures are more likely to kind of put up with maybe not being treated well at some points because they can see that doing their duty is more important. So those are the 6 cultural dimensions. Evaluating them. So to some extent, they have some use. I mean, I think that those dimensions, they have stereotypes, are very generalized. But there's, it's based on a number of surveys, so there's likely to be some truth in there. So all multinational organizations can use them to design hierarchies, especially in different countries. They might have different hierarchy systems in different countries. So in some countries with high power distance, they might have a very strict hierarchical structure because that's what the culture is favoring. But in low power distance countries, they may want less of a hierarchy because that's the culture. And similarly in designing training systems, the degree of centralization versus decentralization. But I think you can see that builds into stereotypes. The research is decades old. And there's also lots of other factors that are significant to differences. So if you look at a multinational company in 2 different locations, they're going to operate differently. And one reason for them operating differently is going to be culture. But there's going to be lots of other reasons that build into that. Who's the leader, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just one of many factors that build into the differences in multinational organizations. I think overall, this is a tool you could use in an IA. I think it would work nicely in IAs or an extended essay if you're doing one on different cultures within an organization. So I think that's how I would see this tool being used. All right, that's it for now. See you next time.